Hey guys, how's it going? Matt here with the JaYoe Nation. We're gonna have a little JaYoe conversation here. I'm in Hangzhou, walking around this famous West Lake, and I actually had a meeting in Hangzhou, so I thought I'd actually talk to you and do a video from here. But I have something I'd really like to talk to you about. You know, we're going through this COVID-19 pandemic, and a lot of us don't have memories of anything that we can really compare this to. Like, we are going through a unique moment in human history, and although it's different from previous pandemics, it's not completely different, and we might have some things to learn from the last one, the last big one. The last big one was the 1918 pandemic, the Spanish flu dubbed. And I recently listened to a podcast. I really love this podcast. It's called Dispatches from 1918, and it's a Radiolab podcast. And although I'm not going to summarize it, I'm going to leave a link to it that you guys can check out, and I encourage you guys to watch it yourselves or listen to it yourselves, because it is very enlightening. The pandemic was taking hold around World War I. And this created a whole bunch of issues. First of all, the whole world was focused on a world war going on, and they certainly weren't interested in as much in the virus, even though it was killing an estimated 17 to 100 million people. It's hard to get the numbers down. I think they say in India it had the potential to kill 20 million people. So it was a horrible thing that happened in human history, but there was another horrible thing that was happening in human history, that was World War I. And so what countries did is they sort of stifled the news, because they didn't want to bring down morale. They didn't want all of this talk about virus. They wanted everybody focused on confronting the world war that was going on. So all of the countries that were involved in the World War as active members were repressing news of the flu. I won't call it Spanish flu. I'm telling you why they call it the Spanish flu. So all of these countries were restricting news about the Spanish flu in an effort to try to focus everybody on the task at hand, which was World War I. One of the countries that wasn't involving itself on either side, was remaining a neutral party, was Spain. So Spain, unconfined by the repression of the news of World War I, was free to talk about the big topics at hand in Spain. And the big topic at hand in Spain was this influenza virus that was ravaging the population. So the news out of Spain made it sound like the flu was focused in Spain, and so people kind of regarded it as the Spanish flu. Oh, did you hear about the Spanish flu? It's pretty bad over there. Meanwhile, they didn't realize that it was bad pretty much everywhere. It's just news was being squashed in their own country, and the only news that was really telling the truth about the flu was the news coming out of Spain. So it was kind of regarded as the Spanish flu. It's kind of funny that we refer to it as the Wuhan flu, or certain people are saying China virus and all of this stuff. And who knows what will be thought of down the road when all of the I's are dotted, all of the T's are crossed. Maybe, you know, a nickname might not be so well deserved when we find out everything. I think that there's always new information coming out about where this virus might have actually originated, and I don't know where you sit on that, but you know, it's still is being investigated. But anyways, that's neither here nor there with regards to the 1918. It's just interesting that the original Spanish flu moniker that was given to that pandemic was not really well earned, because the virus was rampaging everywhere. It was just, Spain was the only people telling the full truth, or close to the full truth, and they sort of were punished for it because they were the ones that were not throttled by people saying we need to focus on talking about World War I and not this virus, no matter how bad it is. Another interesting tidbit about the Spanish flu is it affected a lot of people in different ways that had huge ramifications. Now, obviously, you can listen to the podcast when I'm finished, but why don't you let me review some of the situations that were covered in the podcast. After World War I ended, there was a question about how to deal with Germany. Germany caused the world a lot of pain, a lot of death, and a lot of destruction. And, hello. And there was a lot of people that wanted to see Germany just severely punished for what they had done. There was a lot of people that didn't want to see that. They wanted to see the world sort of take a deep breath and move on. One of those countries was America. Yeah, America was the country that wanted peace all over the, that wanted peace all over the world. Like, they were pushing for peace really hard. Woodrow Wilson was a peacemonger, and his purpose in the negotiations was to try to make it so the countries that really wanted to deal Germany a blow took a little easier on them. He thought that if you punish Germany too hard, it would create an opportunity for more conflict. Like, violence begets violence, violence begets violence, and punishment begets violence, and so you just create this never-ending cycle of punishment and violence and punishment and violence. And his thought was, maybe if we just nip it in the bud right now, just find a peaceful solution, and we all can just move on, maybe we'll preempt a potential future conflict. And one of the countries that had the opposite stance was a guy named Clemenceau, who was the president of France. He wanted to lay down the hammer on Germany and make them really, really hurt for what they had done to their country and to their citizens. I don't think of it as too unjustified, but I also understand the idea of trying to find a peaceful solution that doesn't hurt people too much, in essence driving them towards war in the future again. Anyways, they were in a negotiating table. Woodrow Wilson was sort of like the unstoppable force, and Clemenceau was the unmovable object. And so you had this sort of meeting of two forces. And I think that historically Woodrow Wilson was sort of getting some sort of the edge. And Clemenceau was getting frustrated. He wanted to make Germany hurt. And Woodrow Wilson didn't. Well, Woodrow Wilson got the flu. And I guess it knocked him on his ass. It knocked him on his ass really bad. Oh, bird. No one's 100% sure whether it was a Spanish flu or not. At the time, it wasn't as easy as it is now to test and get results and things like this. But it can be reasonably ascertained that Woodrow Wilson got the Spanish flu from his symptoms and the stories at the time. He got it hit pretty hard. He was delirious. He was out for a week, just very, very serious symptoms. And when he came back, he was much weaker. His stance on peace much more fluid. And when he went back to the negotiating table with France, he conceded all of his pro-peace stances, and he sort of let them run roughshod over him. In the end, Germany was punished severely. Reparations and just their seat of power. I mean, they were just hit really, really hard. And like when I listened to the podcast, I was thinking, well, you know, Germany deserved severe punishment. They did some horrible things during World War I. If you have ever want to listen to a great podcast, another podcast recommended in this podcast recommendation is a Dan Carlin podcast, and he does a great review of World War I and how devastating and how just incredibly brutal that war was. I'll leave links to that in the description as well. Great, great, great listen. I recommend it. Anyways, I somewhat, after learning a bit about World War I, you kind of recommend or appreciate the fact that Germany should have been punished. But had Woodrow Wilson stuck to his guns and not been weakened by the Spanish flu, which is theorized that that's what weakened him, possibly the stage would not have been set for World War II. Because by punishing Germany into oblivion, you repressed the entire German economy. You didn't help them kind of come out of this as a better Germany. Everybody felt beaten down. Everybody felt like they didn't deserve that sort of a punishment. And a character came out of that. A voice. A figurehead. Hitler. Hitler rose out of this feeling that the punishment was not justified. And Germany needs to fight back. It needs to collect itself. We are better than what we've been punished for, and we can come back, and we can come back stronger. And so, over time, the decision of Woodrow Wilson to pull back on this peaceful stance might have laid the groundwork for Hiroshima, for the Holocaust, for all of the lives lost there, for an incredible travesty that beset the world on World War II. And the podcast lays a really interesting supposition that the Spanish flu, although was unseen, was sitting at that negotiating table, was pushing Woodrow Wilson to lessen his stance. And it kind of, the podcast goes through a bunch of these suppositions that had the virus not gone through, somebody might have made a different decision, and the world would have been better or potentially worse for it, depending on how you look at it. But small things like this really tip the scales in different directions, and it's a great podcast to listen to. I think that looking back at the history of the Spanish flu is really important, and it also can get us prepared for potential eventualities. This podcast is just one of many that I would recommend, and maybe we can talk about different podcasts in the future that you might want to listen to. But listening to this podcast helped me to understand the Spanish flu, and in turn helped me to understand the current situation that we're in with COVID-19. It makes me think of what decisions might have been made previously that wouldn't be made now because of the virus. It makes me think about the President Trump and his bout of COVID and what lessons he might have learned or not learned, and the damage caused by his potential downplaying of the virus. And we are into uncharted territories. The podcast also talks about the epidemiology of the Spanish flu. Do you know that the current flu, the current influenza, is an evolution of the Spanish flu? The Spanish flu, which killed many, many millions of people, has been with us for 100 years. And COVID-19 could as well. Now, it's a different sort of virus, so it has different traits, but it still could be something that stays with us for a very long time. And listening to this podcast also illuminated me to the lifespan and the evolution of virus or a influenza. And so I think it behooves us to look back. So check it out in the description. This has kind of been a unique conversation. It's just something I wanted to sit down and talk to you about while I sit here on the edge of Westlake and appreciate oh man, what a beautiful day. And the fact that we can go around without masks and travel and have a pretty much regular life. And decisions today could direct the world in ways that we can't even predict. And I think we need to be aware of the ripples, right? That's an interesting thing. I talked about that in a last podcast, is that, you know, everything that we do, as this wave hits the wall and then goes off, ripples change things. They can change everything. And as they go out, they can have unforeseen consequences on the other side of this lake. And I think that listening to that podcast can get you to appreciate that even more. this COVID-19 pandemic is creating ripples, the effects of which we have no idea the ramifications of. And the only way we're going to see them is by continuing down the road and experiencing time. So thanks a lot, guys. Take a look at that podcast. Also take a look at the Dan Carlin podcast regarding the World War I. Great podcast. I think you have to buy the Dan Carlin podcast, but they are well worth it. Just $1.50 you can listen to it. Really great. I have a WeChat code down below and a Patreon and a buy me a coffee thing, all sorts of things if you want to follow me along and take part in my journey and everything. And really appreciate you guys being part of my journey. Subscribe, comment, share, like, dislike if you would like. But I think that this podcast was illuminating to me and will be equally illuminating to you. So have a good one, stay safe, wear your mask, and JaYoe.